The notification arrives at 7:14 a.m. on a Wednesday while you're standing at the counter waiting for the toaster. Not a phone call, not a letter, not the kind of moment the younger version of you imagined when you pictured this number arriving. Just a brokerage alert, 3 lines of text, the same format as every other one you've ever dismissed without reading, except this one you read. You read it twice, actually, standing there in your socks while the toast goes slightly too dark. The number is $5,214.83. You put the phone face down on the counter. You eat the toast anyway. And the silence around the whole thing is so complete, so ordinary, so completely unlike what you spent years expecting, that it almost feels like the app made a mistake. It didn't make a mistake. This is just what arrival looks like from the inside. Nobody tells you about the silence. They tell you about the number. They talk about it in terms of freedom and security, and the exhale that's supposed to come with finally landing on the right side of something enormous. What they don't mention is that the exhale doesn't come on a Wednesday morning over burnt toast in a kitchen that looks exactly the same as it did yesterday. The feeling you spent years projecting onto this number, that quiet, settled certainty, that specific weightlifting, it doesn't arrive with the alert. You sit with that for a while. Not because it's devastating, because it's genuinely surprising. You did the thing, you stayed in, kept adding, made the boring, unglamorous transfers through the years when nothing felt like it was moving. And the number is real. It's sitting there with your name on it. And your first emotion, the honest one underneath everything else, is something closer to confusion than joy. $5 million invested at the market's long-run average return generates roughly $350,000 a year. That's $29,166 a month, arriving without a login, or a meeting, or anyone approving it. The math is clean and large, and it sits there being true while you drive to work the same route you've driven for 7 years. That's the part that starts to feel strange almost immediately. The life around the number hasn't changed. The commute is the same. The Tuesday afternoon conference call is the same. The grocery store is the same grocery store. The number is enormous by almost any standard you could apply, and nothing about the day reflects it. You're not sure what you expected. Some visible shift in the texture of things, maybe. Some signal from the world that the ledger had moved. What you get instead is a Wednesday that looks indistinguishable from every other Wednesday you've ever had. Your colleague Marcus Delgado posts on LinkedIn about closing a Series B. 42 comments inside the first hour. Congratulations from people he barely knows, from former colleagues he hasn't spoken to in 3 years, from a venture partner whose name you recognize. The comments keep stacking. Marcus is wearing a blazer in the photo, standing in front of what looks like a conference room with the company logo behind him. You like the post and close the tab. You have no equivalent post. There's no announcement, no event, no moment that translates into something shareable. The milestone you just crossed doesn't come with a photo because it came from years of doing nothing interesting with money, which is frustratingly exactly why it worked. That's not a complaint. It's just a thing you notice. What changes first isn't what you expected to change. It's not the spending, not the lifestyle, not some sudden permission slip to live differently. What changes first is the paranoia. You've spent so many years in accumulation mode, adding, protecting, staying in, that the shift from building the number to holding it produces a kind of low-level vigilance you weren't ready for. You start reading things differently. Market commentary that used to float past you now snags. A 6% drawdown that would have been a line item in your mental accounting a few years ago now represents $300,000 on paper. You know the right thoughts. You've run through them before. Unrealized, long-term, temporary. They're all accurate. They also land differently when the number behind the percentage has 7 digits and your name on it. There's a specific version of this that arrives around month 3. You open the account on a Sunday evening, not for any reason, just because it's there, and the number is down from last week, not dramatically. A normal week's fluctuation, and you feel something you recognize immediately, because you felt it before at smaller scales. That pull toward doing something, toward moving something, toward performing the action that at least feels like protecting it. The market didn't do anything unusual. You didn't do anything wrong. But $5 million has a gravitational field that $500,000 didn't quite have. And the same percentage that was abstract at a lower balance becomes visceral when the dollar figure attached to it has 5 digits before the comma. That's not information. That's just your nervous system discovering a new threshold it wasn't expecting. Here's what makes the paranoia expensive. It attracts people with products. 2 months after the number crosses, your financial advisor, a pleasant man named Greg Thornton, who you've used for 3 years without any particular complaints, schedules a call. You know, going in, roughly what the call is about. Not the kind that involves reviewing your allocation or discussing expense ratios. The kind where Greg mentions that clients at this level often benefit from a more managed approach. Structured products, maybe some alternative assets, a private equity sleeve, Something with more sophistication to match the size of the portfolio. What Greg doesn't say, and what the materials he emails over don't headline, is what that sophistication costs annually as a percentage of everything you've spent years building. The drag is real, and it compounds in the wrong direction, quietly, automatically, every year you don't check the fine print. You thank Greg for his time and call him back the following week with specific questions about expense ratios. The call is shorter than the first one. You have one friend who knows the actual number. Her name is Priya Srivastava, and she found out 2 years ago by accident. The kind of accident that happens when you leave a brokerage statement on a kitchen table during a long weekend. She got quiet for a moment, and then she said something you've thought about since. She said it must be strange, carrying something nobody can see. That's the word she used, carrying. Which turned out to be more accurate than you would have predicted. Because there is a weight to it that isn't the good kind of weight, at least not entirely. It's the weight of a thing that changes the context of every conversation you're not having about it, with people who are talking about mortgages and car payments and whether they can swing a vacation this year. Dinners with old friends start to have an odd texture. Nothing anyone says is wrong. The conversations are genuine, but there's a version of your life sitting just underneath the surface of every exchange, invisible and enormous, that creates a distance you didn't build on purpose. A friend mentions stress about a layoff rumor at her company. You listen and you care, and underneath the caring is a floor you have that she doesn't have, a floor she doesn't know you have, and the gap between what she's experiencing and what you would experience in the same situation is so large that honesty about it would change the conversation into something neither of you knows how to navigate. So you don't say it, which is the right call, and it still costs you something you don't have a word for. Your brother-in-law Daniel calls in late October. He's been looking at a restaurant concept, a fast casual place. Good location, he thinks. Needs about $200,000 to get off the ground, and he wanted to talk through it because he knows you've done well. He doesn't know how well. What he knows is enough. You listen to the pitch, which is earnest and detailed and reflects a year of thinking. You ask questions, real ones, not the kind designed to end the conversation politely. What's the monthly nut? What does the lease look like? What's the owner's experience in food service? He hasn't thought through all of it yet, and you both know that by the end of the call. You tell him to come back when the numbers are tighter. You hang up wondering which version of this call you were having, the uncle version, the investor version, the version where the number in your account is invisible and you're just family. All three, probably, and that's the thing $5 million doesn't resolve. It just adds a dimension to every relationship that wasn't there before. Spending changes in a direction you didn't predict. Not toward more, toward different. You thought the number would make spending easier, that some mental friction around money would dissolve once the floor was this solid. What actually happens is subtler and harder to describe. You stop buying things that feel like they're trying to signal something. A watch upgrade you'd been considering for 2 years stops interesting you entirely around month 4, not for any principled reason. It just starts to seem like a translation problem, like the thing you were originally trying to say with the watch no longer has an audience that matters to you. You replace your laptop when it dies. You buy the same running shoes you've been buying for 6 years. The grocery store is still the same grocery store. Nothing about this makes you special. It just makes the accumulation logic harder to undo than you thought it would be. The decision paralysis is its own category. At $5 million invested, you could do a version of almost anything. Semi-retire, change careers, buy a building, spend a year not doing much of anything while the compounding runs. The options aren't limited the way they were at $500,000, or even at $2 million. And what you discover is that unlimited options don't produce clarity. They produce the opposite. When one path was closed by the math, you didn't have to choose it. Now almost nothing is closed by the math, and you still haven't moved. You've been in the same job for 7 years. You still live in the same neighborhood. Every morning the same alarm, the same drive, the same Tuesday conference call. The number doesn't make the choosing easier. It just removes the excuses and leaves the actual question standing there without cover. A woman at a conference you attend in March, a financial planner named Diane Kessler, who works with high net worth clients, says something during a panel that stays with you. She says the biggest behavioral shift she sees at the 7-figure level isn't recklessness, which is what people expect. It's rigidity. People who built real wealth through discipline have a hard time turning the accumulation switch off. Even when turning it off is exactly what the math calls for. They keep saving at the same rate, keep deferring the same purchases, keep carrying the same low-grade financial anxiety, long after the original threat that produced those behaviors has been neutralized. You don't raise your hand to confirm this. You don't have to. You recognize it in a specific and uncomfortable way. The tax conversation is one nobody prepares you for adequately. Not the mechanics of it. The mechanics are learnable. You can find a good CPA and work through asset location and tax loss harvesting and all the rest. What you're not prepared for is the emotional adjustment to seeing large dollar amounts leaving the account in April for reasons that are completely correct and still feel like losing. A seven-figure portfolio at full growth generates taxable events. The number going to the IRS in a good year is not a rounding error. You know intellectually that paying large taxes means the underlying returns were large. The knowledge is accurate. It doesn't make the transfer feel clean. You sit with the number your accountant gives you for a moment longer than you mean to, in the same way you used to sit with a credit card balance, even though the situations are structurally opposite. Your neighbor Ray, who retired at 58 from a job in industrial sales, comes over on a Saturday in September, and the two of you end up talking longer than either of you planned. He doesn't know your number. He knows roughly what you do for work. He talks about his first year of retirement. He says the part he didn't expect was missing the structure, not the work itself, the shape of the day that work provided. The way the morning had a reason to move. He had to rebuild that shape deliberately, which took most of the first year. You're still employed, you have all the structure you need, but you file the observation somewhere, because the day you have a choice about the structure is not as far off as it used to be. The $5 million number, if you let 7% run without touching it, becomes roughly $10 million in about 10 years. 10 million becomes 20 in another decade after that. The math keeps doing what the math does whether you're watching it or not. And somewhere in that recognition is a version of peace that isn't the peace you spent years imagining. The imagined version was arrival, stillness, exhale, done. The actual version is more like standing on a platform watching a train that never stops, except it's going somewhere useful, and you built the track, and every year it gets a little faster. That's not disappointing, it's just different from the story. And the gap between the story and the thing is where most of the work of the next chapter actually lives. What the number buys at $5 million is a quality of optionality that's genuinely hard to describe to someone who hasn't felt it. Not luxury, optionality. The ability to say no to things that are wrong for reasons that have nothing to do with what they pay. The ability to leave a job that's become corrosive on a timeline of your choosing rather than theirs. The ability to take a year and figure something out without the clock being set by a dwindling account balance. You haven't exercised most of these options yet. That's not the point. The point is that the floor is real and solid and several layers deep, and the fear that used to live in the background of every professional decision, the one that kept a ceiling on how honest you could afford to be, has quietly lost most of its leverage. You still feel it sometimes. It's just lost the teeth. The version of you who set up the first automatic transfer, in an apartment you were paying too much for, in a year where staying in felt unreasonable, couldn't have predicted Wednesday morning with the brokerage alert, and the burnt toast, and the silence. Couldn't have predicted that the arrival would feel less like a finish line, and more like a room you walked into and stood in for a while, trying to understand its dimensions. The silence is still there, most mornings. Not the empty kind, the kind that has weight and shape and belongs to something you built slowly and correctly over a long time, without anyone watching, without the LinkedIn post, without Marcus Delgado's 42 comments. You pick up the phone on a Thursday afternoon and call your accountant about the Q4 estimated payment. The account is up from last week. You notice it the way you notice the weather, and then you close the app and go make dinner.